The day the humans arrived at Vault Station Korath, Commander Vrail 9 was having what he considered a perfectly organized morning. His data pads were sorted. His subordinates were terrified of him, which was exactly how he preferred them. His coffee, well, the Vrethian equivalent, a sulfur-based liquid that smelled like burning ambition, was hot, and the galaxy's most advanced military evaluation program, designed by the combined intellect of 6 spacefaring civilizations, was ready to greet its newest test subjects, the humans. Vrail 9 had read the intake reports, of course. He was a thorough commander. Humanity had submitted their application to the Galactic Defense Pact roughly 14 standard cycles ago, and after 14 cycles of debate, denial, reapplication, more debate, a small political incident involving a human ambassador and a dessert platter, and then even more debate, the Council had finally reluctantly agreed to let them try the evaluation that no species had ever passed on their first attempt. Most did not pass on their 5th attempt. One species, the Korathi, had dissolved their entire military program after failing it 7 times and decided to pursue competitive agriculture instead. Vrail 9 stood at the observation deck above the main processing bay, watching through the reinforced glass as 42 humans were escorted inside by his staff. He clasped his 4 upper limbs behind his back, narrowed his 3 eyes to what he personally considered an intimidating expression, and observed. The humans looked smaller than he expected. He had prepared himself for something more dramatic. The Council briefings had included phrases like biologically unpredictable and psychologically anomalous, and we strongly recommend reviewing your insurance coverage before proceeding. Vrail 9 had assumed that was standard paperwork hyperbole. Now, watching 42 of them file into the bay in their gray uniforms, chatting with each other, laughing at jokes he couldn't hear through the glass, he was not immediately alarmed. One of them, a broad-shouldered individual with dark skin and a shaved head, seemed to be doing an impression of someone. The others were laughing. He had the easy, loose energy of a person who had never once in his life felt genuinely threatened by a room. His name, Vrail 9 would later learn, was Sergeant Deo Ize, and Deo Ize was about to become the single most professionally humiliating being that Vrail 9 had ever encountered in 40 years of military service. But that was later. First, the orientation. Lieutenant Fex, Vrail 9's second-in-command, a wiry Vrethian with nervous eyes and an impressive collection of stress-related ailments, cleared his throat at the podium. "Welcome," said Fex, in translated standard, "to the Galactic Defense Pact's mandatory physical and psychological evaluation program. You have been assigned to Evaluation Tier 1. This is the beginner tier." One of the humans raised a hand. Fex blinked. "Yes, are there snacks? Because I've been on a transport for 16 hours, and I could absolutely eat." Fex stared. "There are no snacks. That's a bad start," the human said cheerfully, and sat back down. Fex consulted his notes, clearly trying to remember where he had been. "You will be assessed across 3 categories: physical endurance, psychological resilience, and tactical adaptability. These tests have been designed and refined across 200 years of multi-species military research. They are considered by every measuring standard available to modern science to be extremely difficult." The humans nodded politely. The way you nod when someone is telling you something you have agreed to sit through. "The first test," said Fex, "begins in 1 hour. I strongly recommend you use that time to mentally prepare." What the humans used that time for, as Vrail 9 observed from his deck, was a card game. He watched them for the full hour. They produced a worn deck of cards from somewhere, arranged themselves in a loose circle on the floor of the preparation chamber, and played with a focused intensity that would not have been out of place in a war room. One of them, a compact woman with red hair cut close to her skull, kept winning. Her name, per the intake roster, was Corporal Mara Voss, and every time she won she made a small noise of satisfaction that was somehow both modest and deeply, deeply smug. "They are not preparing," Fex noted quietly, appearing at Vrail 9's side. "I can see that," said Vrail 9. "Should we be concerned?" "No," said Vrail 9, with absolute confidence. "The first test is the endurance march, 40 kilometers over simulated Class 3 terrain. No species has completed it in under 9 hours. The record is held by the Keth Solari, who average 11. It will refocus them." Fex nodded, visibly relieved. The endurance march began at 0600 station time. The terrain simulation was, by any reasonable standard, brutal. Volcanic rock surfaces designed to shift under pressure. Humidity set to 90%. Gravity calibrated to 1.3 standard. Visibility at roughly 60% due to simulated atmospheric particulate. The kind of environment that made even the most physically capable species reconsider their life choices around kilometer 8. Vrail 9 watched the monitors. The humans started at a pace he would describe as brisk. By kilometer 5 he expected to see the familiar signs: shortened strides, dropped shoulders, the particular slump that said, "I have made a terrible decision." He had seen it in 23 species. It was practically a universal constant. The humans sped up. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would have been immediately alarming to a casual observer. But Vrail 9 was not a casual observer. He had 40 years of experience reading body language across 17 different species, and what he was seeing from the humans was not effort. It was something worse. It was comfort. Sergeant Dio Eze, in the front cluster, was talking. At kilometer 12 on volcanic rock, at 1.3 gravity, in 90% humidity, the man was carrying on what appeared from the audio feed to be an animated conversation about something called pre-seasoning cast iron, a topic whose relevance to military endurance Vrail 9 could not begin to estimate. Corporal Mara Voss had pulled something from her pack, a nutrition bar of some kind, and was eating while she walked. A third human, a lanky young man with close-cropped hair whose intake form listed his name as Private Tomi Abara, had started quietly humming. Vrail 9 turned to look at Fex. Fex was already looking at him with the expression of a creature who had begun to suspect it had made an error in career choice. "They are singing," said Fex. "Humming," Vrail 9 corrected, with the precision of a man holding desperately onto something. "Does it matter?" Vrail 9 did not answer because there was no answer that would have helped. The humans completed the endurance march in 4 hours and 52 minutes. 4 hours and 52 minutes. Against a record of 11 hours. Against a designed completion threshold of 9 hours is exceptional. 7 hours is theoretical. We have never seen 5 and did not account for it in the scoring matrix. Vrail 9 called Fex into his office. "They were not running," Vrail 9 said, mostly to himself. "No, sir. They were walking, talking. One of them was eating." Corporal Voss. "Yes, sir." She offered some to Private Abara around kilometer 20. He declined. I believe he mentioned something about an allergy. Vrail 9 pressed 2 of his hands against his desk and stared at the completion time on his screen as if staring long enough would change it. It did not change. "How are they rated for the psychological evaluation?" he asked. Fex checked his pad. "The isolation protocol, sir. 48 hours in a sensory-reduced individual chamber. Studies show that most species begin exhibiting measurable psychological stress responses at the 6-hour mark. Keth Solari averaged 30 hours before distress threshold was crossed." "Good," said Vrail 9. "Schedule it for tomorrow. Let them rest tonight." This was, he would later decide, his first mistake. Not the scheduling, the optimism. The isolation protocol was designed on a principle that held across every tested species in the pact. Isolation is the great equalizer. No matter how physically capable a being was, the absence of stimulus, company, and purpose would, given enough time, begin to erode the edges of the psyche. It was not cruelty. It was science. 48 hours of nothing, alone in a featureless gray room, was simply too much for any biological mind to process without cost. The humans went in at 0800. Vrail 9 set up in the observation suite and waited. At hour 2, 3 of the humans had fallen asleep. At hour 4, 7 more had fallen asleep. By hour 6, when Vrail 9's monitors should have been registering the first readings of anxiety, restlessness, and early-stage psychological strain, the majority of the humans were either asleep, doing what appeared to be physical exercise in their individual chambers, or staring at the ceiling with the blissful, vacant expression of beings who had achieved some kind of perfect internal peace. Private Tomi Abara had, somehow, found a way to braid a section of his uniform sleeve into a small decorative knot. He was examining it with genuine artistic satisfaction. Sergeant Dio Eze had apparently decided to do push-ups. He had been doing them for 3 hours. He did not look tired. He looked, if anything, like a man who had found his calling. Corporal Mara Voss was running what appeared to be mathematical calculations on the condensation on the inside of her chamber wall, using her finger, on the wall, for fun. Vrail 9 stared. "Fex," he said. "Sir. The distress monitors. Registering baseline, sir. All 42 subjects. Baseline." "Yes, sir." "As in, the same as when they arrived." Vrail 9 sat back in his chair, looked at the ceiling of his observation suite, and took a long, careful breath of sulfur-scented station air. He thought about the Korathi, who had quit after 7 attempts and become farmers. He thought about whether competitive agriculture was perhaps an underrated career path. He thought about the human female writing equations on a chamber wall with her finger because she had run out of other things to do and apparently nothing was not an option. Her brain was capable of accepting, "Run the scans again," he said. "I've run them 4 times, sir." "Run them a 5th time." Fex ran them a 5th time. Baseline, all 42, comfortable, rested, and in the case of Sergeant Dio Ezi, improving his upper body strength in a room specifically designed to be unbearable. Verlail 9 pulled up the 3rd evaluation on his schedule. The tactical pressure scenario, simulated combat, incomplete intelligence, changing parameters mid-mission, 3 objectives, each of which would contradict the others at the critical moment. It was the test that broke everyone. The test designed to show a species its own limits by giving it more than it could hold at once. He looked at the 42 humans on his monitors. He thought, against his better instincts, about what limits might mean to a species that had responded to 48 hours of isolation by doing push-ups and writing math problems on the wall. Then he looked at his completion time screen. 4 hours and 52 minutes. He told himself the tactical test would be different. He told himself this with great conviction. He was, as we shall see in Part 2, catastrophically wrong. Vrail 9 did not sleep well that night. This was unusual for him. He was, by nature and by decades of disciplined military habit, a creature of rigid routine. He slept 6 hours. He woke without an alarm. He consumed his sulfur beverage in silence, and read the morning briefings with the focused calm of a commander who had never once been surprised by anything he could not eventually explain. That night he lay in the dark of his quarters and thought about a human doing push-ups in a sensory deprivation chamber for 3 hours. Not because he was ordered to, not because there was a goal attached to it, simply because the alternative apparently was sitting still, and sitting still was something that Sergeant Dioise had apparently decided, somewhere in the deep architecture of his biology, was not acceptable. Rail 9 stared at the ceiling. He thought about the card game before the march. He thought about Corporal Mara Voss eating a nutrition bar at kilometer 12 on volcanic rock in 90% humidity, with the energy of someone on a pleasant afternoon walk. He thought about Private Tomi Ibarra humming. Then he pulled up the file on the tactical pressure scenario and reminded himself that physical endurance and psychological stubbornness were not the same as tactical intelligence. The 3rd test was a different machine entirely. It had broken species that were physically superior to humans in every documented category. The Yethkara, who could survive vacuum exposure for up to 6 minutes and bench press things that would make a structural engineer weep, had collapsed in the tactical scenario at the 40-minute mark. Complete strategic paralysis. 6 of their commanders had filed formal complaints afterward, which the council had filed under expected responses and ignored. The tactical pressure scenario was not about strength. It was about the mind relationship with chaos. And chaos, Vrail 9 told himself with renewed confidence, was a universal language of failure. He slept 3 hours. It was not restful. The briefing room at 40700 was crisp and cold, the way Vrail 9 preferred it. The 42 humans filed in looking, to his mild irritation, completely rested. Several of them were carrying cups of something hot from the station's nutrition dispensary, because apparently the humans had figured out within 6 hours of arrival that if you pressed a specific sequence of buttons on the dispensary marked not for carbon-based biology, you got something that closely approximated coffee. Nobody had told them this. They had simply figured it out. Fex had discovered this at 063 and had come to Vrail 9's office with the expression of a being quietly losing confidence in the predictability of the universe. Versil 9 had told him to add it to the report and move on. Lieutenant Fex stood at the briefing room podium and, to his credit, delivered the scenario parameters without his voice shaking more than once. "You will be divided into 6 teams of 7, said Fex. "Each team will operate independently within a simulated contested environment. You will receive 3 primary mission objectives at the start. Be advised that these objectives will change during the scenario. Information you receive may be incomplete, contradictory, or deliberately misleading. The scenario runs for a maximum of 4 hours. Successful completion requires achieving a minimum of 2 out of 3 adjusted final objectives. No team in the history of this evaluation has achieved all 3. He paused there, because that pause was part of the script. It was meant to land with weight. Sergeant Dio Ezi looked at the human next to him, a square-jawed woman named Corporal Sarah Finn, and they exchanged the particular glance of 2 people who have just been told a thing that they have mutually, silently decided to treat as a suggestion. Verel 9, watching from the observation suite, saw that glance. He made a note in his file. The note said, "Observe Team 1, then he added, "Observe all teams," then he added, "Consider early retirement." He deleted the last line before saving. The scenario began. The simulation environment was a contested urban grid, 3 square kilometers, with 17 designated control points, 4 extraction zones, and a command node at the center that served as the scenario's spine. Fog of war was set to maximum. Communication between teams was allowed but unreliable, designed to drop at the worst possible moments. Each team's initial briefing pointed them toward the same 3 objectives with slightly different information, which meant that if they compared notes, they would discover their intelligence was contradictory. Most species at this point argued. The argument consumed time. The time consumed the mission window. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Team 1, led by Sergeant Dio Eze, received their briefing, spent 45 seconds reading it, and then Eze said out loud to his team, "Half of this is probably wrong. Let's figure out which half." Vrail 9 leaned forward in his seat. "Sir," said Fex quietly, "that is actually the correct analytical response to the scenario design." "I know," said Vrail 9. "It took the Keth Solari 4 attempts to arrive at that conclusion." "I know," said Vrail 9 again, with the flat tone of a being who was developing a complicated relationship with the word no. What happened next over the following 4 hours was something that the Galactic Defense Pact's Evaluation Division would spend the next 3 years arguing about in academic papers and closed-door briefings, and still not fully agree on. Team 1 moved immediately on objective confirmation rather than objective pursuit. They sent 2 members ahead as scouts, not to capture points but to verify which control nodes were actually active versus which were decoys planted in the briefing. Within 20 minutes they had identified 2 of the 4 deliberate misinformation elements in their mission packet. Team 3, led by Corporal Mara Voss, did something structurally similar but operationally different. Rather than splitting for reconnaissance, Voss pushed her entire unit to the scenario's communication dead zones, identified where the signal drops occurred, mapped them against the mission parameters, and used the pattern of what information was being deliberately blocked to reverse engineer what the scenario designers did not want them to know. Vrail 9 watched her do this with a cup of coffee balanced on her knee, cross-referencing signal blackout data with mission timing with the calm intensity of someone who had decided that the scenario itself was a puzzle, and puzzles, to Corporal Mara Voss, were not stress, they were entertainment. "She is using the interference pattern as an intelligence source," said Fex, who had stopped pretending not to be impressed about an hour in. "She is," said Vrail 9. "That is not something we designed for. No, the scenario does not account for a subject treating the scenario's own deception architecture as a dataset. No, it does not. Should we adjust the parameters in real time?" Vrail 9 looked at him. "We are allowed to do that." "Yes, sir. It is a permitted variable intervention." Vrail 9 looked back at the monitor where Mara Voss had just updated her team's map with a confidence accuracy that the scenario's own internal tracking system rated at 87% correct, using nothing but signal interference patterns and about 40 minutes of applied focus. "Leave it," said Vrail 9. "Sir, leave it. I want to see what happens." What happened was this. At the 2-hour mark, the scenario triggered its first major parameter shift. Objective 2 was rescinded and replaced with a new objective that directly conflicted with the progress both Team 1 and Team 3 had made. It was the scenario's trump card, the moment where accumulated investment became a liability. Species who had worked hard toward Objective 2 found themselves unable to psychologically pivot away from it. They kept chasing the old goal out of sheer momentum, and the new objective slipped away while they were looking backward. Team 1 received the parameter change, and Sergeant Dio Eze said, without hesitation, "New game. What do we have that still works?" Team 3 received the parameter change, and Corporal Mara Voss said, "Good. I was wondering when this would happen." Vex made a sound that was not quite a word. Vrail 9 did not say anything. He was busy watching Team 5, led by a quiet, methodical man named Corporal Breck Sato, who had spent the first 90 minutes doing something no other team had thought to do. He had positioned his team in the geographic center of the scenario map and simply observed. He had not captured a single control point. He had not moved aggressively toward any objective. He had watched every other team move, tracked their positions, noted the scenario's response patterns, and built in 90 minutes of apparent inaction the most complete picture of the actual scenario architecture that any team possessed. When the parameter shift hit, Corporal Breck Sato already knew what the new objective required, because he had identified it as a hidden variable 40 minutes earlier, noted it, and waited. His team moved at the 92-minute mark with the practiced confidence of people executing a plan they had already rehearsed in their heads. "He was mapping us," Fex said quietly. "He was mapping everything," Vrail 9 said. "The scenario, the teams, the response timing. He treated the evaluation itself as the enemy." Yes. There was a silence in the observation suite that had a specific quality to it. It was the silence of a structure that had believed itself solid, discovering, very gently, that it had been resting on assumptions. The 4-hour mark approached. Vergeline's hand moved toward the control that would formally close the scenario window. He did not press it, because at 3 hours and 41 minutes, something happened that the evaluation program's 200-year history had never recorded before. Team 1, Team 3, and Team 5, operating independently, with unreliable communications, in a fog-of-war environment specifically designed to prevent coordination, achieved all 3 adjusted final objectives, simultaneously, not by coincidence, by the kind of adaptive, instinct-level coordination that happens when separate minds trained in the same culture and shaped by the same particular flavor of stubborn, creative, consequence-allergic thinking, arrive at the same solution from 3 different directions at the same time. The scenario's scoring system flagged an error. It had not been programmed to record full 3 objective completion. It issued an alert that read anomalous result, verify manually, and then because it was a machine and machines do not feel humiliation, simply stopped. Vrail 9 sat in his chair for a long time after the scenario concluded. The humans were escorted to the debrief room. Through the observation window he watched them. Some of them were animated, replaying moments to each other with gestures and grins. Private Tomi Ibarra was doing his impression again. Sergeant Dioise was laughing, the big unguarded laugh of a person for whom this had been, in some fundamental way, fun. Fun, that was the thing Vrail 9 kept returning to. In the slow, thorough way his mind processed things it found genuinely disturbing. Not the physical results, extraordinary as they were. Not the psychological baseline readings which had remained stubbornly, infuriatingly normal throughout 48 hours of designed isolation. Not even the tactical performance which had just shattered a 200-year-old record by achieving something the program had never considered worth programming a response for. It was that they had enjoyed it. Sergeant Dio Eza had done push-ups in a sensory deprivation chamber because it beat doing nothing, and then he had walked 40 kilometers in volcanic heat while talking about cookware, and then he had spent 4 hours treating a scenario designed to psychologically dismantle him like it was an interesting puzzle someone had left on a table, and he had laughed. Vrail 9 called Fex in. Fex came in carrying a datapad with the compiled results. His expression was the expression of a being who had spent the day watching something he could not categorize, and had decided the healthiest response was to document everything and let someone else name it. "Results, sir," said Fex and set the pad on the desk. Vrail 9 looked at it. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way you look at something you already know you have to send to people who are not going to enjoy receiving it. "The council will want a full report," he said. "Yes, sir. They will ask me to contextualize the results." "Yes, sir. What would you suggest I tell them, Fex?" Fex was quiet for a moment, the thoughtful quiet of someone who had actually been paying attention all day. "Tell them," said Fex carefully, "that the evaluation was functioning correctly. It is designed to find the threshold of a species' capability, the point where they break, the line where function stops, and it did find that threshold with the humans." He paused. "It simply could not locate it within our scoring range." Vrail 9 looked at him. "Every species has a ceiling," Fex continued. "What we discovered today is that the humans have one too. We just do not have the equipment tall enough to see it from here." Vrail 9 was quiet for a very long time. Through the window he could still see the debrief room. Sergeant Dioise had apparently told the punchline of his impression, because the humans were laughing again. The warm, loose, uncomplicated laughter of 42 people who had just been handed the galaxy's hardest military evaluation, and had, without drama or fanfare or any apparent awareness of how extraordinary they were, treated it as a warm-up. Vrail 9 picked up the datapad. He began writing his report to the council. He chose his words with great care because he was a thorough commander, and because some truths delivered without sufficient preparation had a way of causing the kind of widespread institutional panic that was very difficult to clean up afterward. He wrote, "Evaluation completed. Results are attached. I recommend full-tier advancement for all 42 human candidates. I further recommend the Council authorize the development of a new evaluation tier specifically designed for human assessment. Our current program in its entirety functions for this species as an orientation exercise." He reviewed it twice. He sent it. Then Vrail 9 poured himself a very large sulfur beverage, leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, and thought about the Korathi and their competitive agriculture program. Then, for the first time in a very long career, Commander Vrail 9 smiled. Not because anything was funny, because 42 humans had just walked into the galaxy's most advanced military evaluation, finished it before lunch, and the most terrifying part, the part that sat at the back of his mind like a quiet, cold, significant thing, was the simple, undeniable truth that they had not even been trying.